Okay. All right. Hello, viewers. Thank you for joining us this evening, this Thursday. Had to check my planner to remember what day it was. My name is Anna Bright, and I work at One More Page. Presumably, you know that. Presumably, hopefully, if you're smart, you've bought Anna Caritj's debut novel from One More Page. We are so excited here tonight to be with Anna, who is here, as I've said, to talk about her debut novel, LEDA and the Swan, about a young woman who goes missing on Halloween and the other young woman who becomes obsessed with discovering what has happened to her. Publishers Weekly called it a thoughtful exploration of contemporary sexual politics. So if that sounds intriguing to you, then you are in the right place. To briefly introduce our guests tonight, Anna holds a BA from the University of Virginia and an MFA in creative writing from Hollins. She lives in Virginia with her husband, and Bruce Holsinger teaches at the University of Virginia and is the recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship. So here's how this is going to work. I am going to disappear because nobody cares about me right now. But these two wonderful people are going to talk about Anna's book and whatever else their hearts desire for the next, I'm going to say 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes. After that, they will take questions. So there should be some sort of a chat function, whether you're on, not a chat function, a comment function, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube. You can post comments. They will come up in our sidebar here. And whenever the two of you are ready, just say so. I'll jump back on. I can sort of move these comments over to the screen and we can take questions. So I'm going to disappear now. Please give a silent in your homes round of applause for our two wonderful guests. And
great. Well, thank you so much, Anna, and thank you all for being here to celebrate this really extraordinary debut novel. And Anna, it's such a pleasure for me to be here. I'll just start by just embarrassing you by telling you how much I love the book, the story arc, the characters, the suspense, the sense of place. When Anna Bright was introducing us, she read a little blurb from Publishers Weekly, but I wanted to read one also from Kirkus, who reviewed LEDA and the Swan, and this is what they had to say. The novel is a masterclass in atmosphere, intoxicatingly ominous. And that assessment just had a few strands that I wanted to follow up on. A masterclass, so I want to talk about craft tonight. Atmosphere, I want to talk about sense of place in this novel, and intoxicatingly ominous. I want to talk about suspense. So I'm really thrilled to be here. And the first thing to say is just congratulations.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here and just happy to talk about the novel.
Good. Well, that's what we'll do. So let me ask kind of an obvious question about, the origins of the novel, but maybe framing it this way. We, when we write fiction, anyone who starts writing a novel, there's a million different novels that you could write, on many different things. And a lot of people start novels that never get finished. I know you've written short fiction as well. So you may have thought of at one point of developing one of your short stories into a novel, but why this one? Why LEDA and the Swan? Why is this the story that you wanted to tell?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of reasons. I, first of all, sang in a choir at UVA. And when I was a student at UVA, I would always go through Cabell Hall, old Cabell Hall, where my choir rehearsals were. And there was this artist always working on this mural, and it was sort of in progress, but most of it had been completed. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's called A Student's Progress, and it's by Lincoln Perry. And it sort of follows the life of an undergraduate at the University of Virginia, and it's very recognizable. The architecture and the rotunda, it's all there. And so back then, as I said, there were these blank and sort of roughly sketched sections. And I had this strange impulse to fill in those blank spots. But I can't paint, I'm not an artist. So I guess in my own way, I ended up with this novel. That was my own way of sort of filling in the blank spots. And then I guess the more basic answer is just that UVA itself was my inspiration. That it was so much to me, and I spent 4 long years on grounds, and just so much happened there. At any university, so much happens. You know, at UVA, there's obviously Fox Field, and there's parties and beach week, and I did a lot of that. But there are also these classes that are just, you know, that will blow your minds, and your class was one of those. And for my character LEDA, it was astronomy. You know, she was maybe not particularly good at astronomy, but it sort of opened her mind in a way that she hadn't expected. And I think that really happens for a lot of students. And then there's, you know, there's just so much. There's the architecture at UVA, you know, that just, it feels like a university. It feels like a place where you need to sit a little straighter in your chair. I felt that way.
Right.
And then they're just smart kids everywhere. And they were an inspiration to me, you know, kids who were on their way to becoming, you know, engineers and great photographers and neurobiologists and just sort of every kind of person. And so in a way, I suppose I wanted to take a sort of snapshot of all of those different layers of university life. And that was my goal. And
yeah, so you start with this story of this, seeing this mural in one building on one campus. But then what really is, what potential readers should know is that you tell this story that is big and universal and, you know, not place specific. And I wonder if you could talk about, you know, your main viewpoint protagonist, LEDA, and then Charlotte, this elusive character who we meet early on in the novel, but then we lose sight of him for a while. So could you talk a little bit about those two characters and what brings them together to precipitate the story that you tell here?
Yeah. Well, for those who haven't read the novel, there's Charlotte is the character who goes missing. And so LEDA is sort of, she becomes obsessed with this disappearance and with this girl who she really didn't know very well. She encounters her on Halloween night and they exchange a few words, but that's about it. And like you said, Bruce, she, as the novel develops, she, in my mind, she becomes a little more like Charlotte as the book goes, as she learns more about Charlotte and who she was. LEDA, I don't know. I think she starts to question things, I suppose, that she hadn't questioned before. And you know, for me, a lot of that came from of what was happening around UVA when I was a student. You know, it was also, there were some complicated moments when I was a student at UVA. There was Morgan Harrington disappeared when I was an undergraduate. I think I was in my second year. Yardley Love, I'm sure many of you know these things, but she was murdered by her boyfriend while I was a student. Hannah Graham disappeared right after I graduated. So, you know, my book is not necessarily about these events, but they created an atmosphere, as you said, Bruce, in that very kind review. And actually, I was just on campus the other day, and the Beta Bridge had been painted for Yardley Love for the anniversary of her death. And so it really, even now, over 10 years later, is still alive in that place. People still remember, and I remember, of course. So I don't know. The place really was sort of. It was just so important to the whole book. But like you said, I wanted to make it universal. You know, it's the themes are, these things happen all over the place, not just at UVA.
And it's very much tied up to the Me Too movement, to stories of sexual violence on campuses. You know, so there are these themes running through it that make it very contemporary, but it's also reaching back into the past in some really interesting ways. You know, the past of its setting, of the university, and the weight of that, the way that you make the setting almost a character. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your building of character and the way that you kind of maybe let us lift the hood on the way that you build character. And that's, how do you tinker with this with the problem of character when you were building out LEDA, for example? What are the elements that go into that?
Yeah. Well, it's tough, as you know. Anna didn't mention this in her introduction, but you are also a novelist. You've written many novels, included the Gifted School, which I loved.
Thank you.
And so you know that it's complicated to write character and to really get somebody right. But for me, when I was writing LEDA, I was pretty close to her. I was only 2 years out of college when I started writing the book. So it was all very fresh. And I suppose I was really trying to respect and sort of honor the experience of people my age. And I did my best to have complete faith in my characters and to sort of, I don't know, to honor their perspectives and give them a bit of dignity, even if it was, in the basement of a fraternity party or, sliding half naked down a slip and slide or whatever the case may be. I wanted to to find some dignity there. So I think there's wisdom in the idea that you should try to love all of your characters.
Yeah.
Even the ones that are slightly silly or slightly annoying.
Yeah.
Even if you're tempted to revel in their stupidity.
Yeah, well, that came across so well for me is just, these encounters that she would have out on what we call the lawn, just in the middle of the, what is the quad at UVA, where she'd run into an annoying sorority sister, but it would be, and you'd be annoyed too, but you would also sense this kind of kindness and love there. And that's such a gift to be able to do that with minor characters rather than having them just be throwaways, props to make them come alive, even if only for a moment. And I just thought that was so well done. Did you have a minor character in there that you really thought about in that way, like someone we may only see for half a page, where you spent like a week thinking about that person?
Well, I did think about, she's there for more than half a page, but I thought about Carly in that way.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people find her a little annoying, or that's what I've heard. But to me, I really have a lot of sympathy for her. She's a passionate person, and she has ideas, and she's not afraid to try things.
Right. Right.
And so I don't know. She's sometimes a little maybe misguided or silly, but I find her to be a sort of energetic presence. And I don't know, she's not all bad.
Well, so much of the energy also comes from Greek life. So there, LEDA and her sisters in this sorority. I assume it's one you made up. Yeah, and just some random Greek letters. And then, they go to a frat party. There's other fraternities. That's a, deep part of the novel. And I don't know you well enough to know for sure whether you were in a sorority, but maybe you were. But I would love to know how you did the research for that, and what resources you drew on aside from your own experience, and, how you dug around in that.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it was a lot of personal experience. And I was not in a sorority, to answer that question, but I was in a women's chorus. And it had a lot of similar functions to a sorority, in that there were social events. We had a brother chorus, which was the Glee Club. And and they had a house. So we had a lot of our parties at the Glee Club house. And so we went to Beach Week together. We went to Foxfield together, so it was not a sorority, but it was similar in many ways. And I think I joined it for a lot of the same reasons that LEDA joins her sorority. I was looking for a support group, I suppose, a sort of family at UVA. And I think that's one of the wonderful things that communities like that can offer. They really do provide an important support network and sort of a home away from home. And so I don't know, for me, I found that, but I also, there were moments when I was disillusioned with that idea too.
Yeah.
You know, like LEDA, I had lost my mother recently,
Yeah.
and there was a part of me that was sort of searching for a mother's love, you know, trying to fill in that hole, which, as you come to realize, is just an unfillable hole. It's impossible.
No, I felt that so deeply because I lost my mother last year right before COVID, and I have
So
that, so reading, this is probably the first novel I read that was not about that particular loss, but that absence was so poignant throughout the book. And did you find it? I mean, it's a question that I guess novelists have to deal with, is that sense of autobiography. This is not autofiction by any means, but how do you translate the intensity of those feelings onto the page? Some of my works are historical fiction, and I feel kind of emotionally distant from it, and I actually have to work really hard sometimes to get that sense of, to get really inside that character. But here you have your own tragedy translating to her tragedy in some ways, and I just, is that too personal to talk about, or?
No, I mean, I think that my experience at UVA did align with LEDA's experience in a lot of ways. But I did need to get a little bit of distance from the material in order to really see it clearly, and to sort of, I don't, just to write the book. And that was part of the reason why I didn't end up naming UVA. It was helpful for me to sort of distance myself from the actual place. And but it is difficult, especially when you're dealing with material that is personal and emotional, and but that's the stuff that you have to write, or at least for me, that's the stuff that I find I just can't turn away from.
Right. That one of the ways that we get close, or that we have to figure out, I guess, is that first choice that you make, and maybe it's something that you revised, but and this is kind of a craft question, and it's about point of view. So, when you begin writing something, you're one of the first choices you have to make is it the I that's narrating? Is it a narrator who's omniscient? Is it someone who's really close in? And you chose for this novel a close third person, and also also past tense. And I'm interested in that choice. And was that something that you deliberated over? Was it something where you started in first person and decided you wanted third? Were you just not conscious of that as a choice going in? I would love to hear about that. Again, another kind of mechanical question about the craft of this novel. But to me, it feels, when I'm reading this, it feels like this is a third person voice that is so, it's works so well. It feels like it couldn't be first person. Like you'd have to write a completely different kind of novel. I may be off, but because maybe you switched at the last minute, but I don't think so. And I just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I tend to be drawn toward close third person for whatever reason. First person is, again, it's talking about that distance between yourself and your material. First person's always just a little too close for me. I have a hard time. I need to have some barrier between myself and the character, particularly when the character is so similar to me in so many ways. So yeah, it was definitely a conscious choice, but I think it was always that way. I don't know if I ever tried it any other way.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I wanted that access to her consciousness too, so
right.
It didn't make sense to be in a distant third, or, I wanted to be in her head and hear her voice. But, for whatever reason, I just need that little bit of remove in order to, I don't know, make sense of everything.
Mm-hmm. But
Does
it's,
that make sense?
yeah, oh yeah, but it's also a very immersive third person, even from that opening scene. And that's another thing I'd love to hear you talk about. And I'm going to make you read something later, but I'll read this now. It's very opening. Leda tied her neon pink running shoes while angels, astronauts, and superheroes began their first rounds of trick-or-treating. They passed around the front step of the Psi Delta sorority, adjusting halos, dragging polyester tails, running or being advised, no running, or simply being carried. An amazed bumblebee, a pod of peas. So you're starting out with a bunch of little kids running up to the center of campus for trick-or-treating. What made you start there? Why begin? And I asked this kind of selfishly. I'm about to teach a fiction course called First Novels, First Pages for a community center here, and I am always interested in how novels begin. What are the choices of beginning? So why do we begin with Leda tying her shoes, seeing a bunch of little kids in Halloween costume?
Yeah, for me, Halloween on the Lawn, for anyone who's ever been there as an adult or as a child or as a student, it's never changed for as long as I can remember. And I, like Leda, was once one of those kids, with the pumpkin bucket going to trick or treat on the lawn. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that day and that moment and that festival is sort of a way of letting time sort of collide for Leda. She's in many places at once in a way. She's back she's back when she was a kid, with her mom. And then she's also, in her shoes, in her skin and sweat, about to go on this sort of solo run. So she's very much alone in this first scene. We do see her sort of passing through the crowd and interacting with friends. But for me, I guess I wasn't conscious of any of this, but but I guess it makes sense to me that she would be in this, be thinking about her mom in this place that, and sort of transported into this past moment.
Sure.
And I don't know, maybe it's just a moment of grief, just finding, I think later in that chapter, she reflects that she could picture her mom there, very easily, that time could loop and everything would be as it was.
Right. I mean, of course, as an English professor, I see people in costumes at the beginning of the novel, and I'm like, we don't know anyone's identity. So identity is a big issue. Right? Everyone's wearing a disguise of some sort. There's just these inherent mysteries in all of the characters, and you, of course, were probably just writing a scene, and you don't want it unpacked that way. But tell us what the novel, how it thinks about identity. Because that seems so important to, you can't separate identity and character, I guess. But it seems like Leda, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but Leda learns a lot of things about herself and about her own identity, who she is over the course of the novel. And I wonder if you can maybe sketch that arc for us in some ways, again, without giving anything away. Like, what are we going to find here about Leda's growth as a person? How does she change?
Yeah, she, well, I guess that's what college is all about, right? For anyone, it's a time of self-discovery, and, it's sort of an amazing moment where you get these 4 years to sort of figure yourself out. You turn 18 and you're sort of ejected from your childhood, and you're told that you're an adult, and you're told that you need to get yourself up on time and, decide what you want to eat and go to class, and you have to do these things yourself. And so for a while, Leda is a third-year student when we meet her. but we hear a little bit about her first couple of years. And for a while, Leda thrives in that sort of environment and that routine. She fills her time with activities. And that's part of the reason she joins the sorority, is that she wants this, she wants to fill her time, essentially. And to me, that's something that I did. And it was sort of a part of, again, it's linked with grief. Everything's linked with grief. It's a way for her to sort of move forward and to not think about the past, and immerse herself in this new world. Universities really do feel like their own little universes.
Mhm.
So you're right. She starts there. She's sort of thriving in her sorority and going to classes. And even though she doesn't always do her homework, she does enjoy her classes and she gets a lot out of them.
Yeah.
And then Charlotte disappears. And so suddenly there's a loss that's introduced into her life, and she does her best to ignore it and sort of move on and keep with her rhythms and continue going to parties. And but it becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. And it just eats at her. And eventually she's spending all of her time thinking about this girl that she never knew, and sort of grappling with loss.
Yeah, and one of the ways that I think that you develop her, she does love her classes, or at least she thinks about them, and she makes allusions to them. The narrator, Leda is the narrator standing right behind Leda's shoulder. She reads what's going on, often through, say, the text that she's learning in English class. You have this hilarious exchange, is it with Carly? I can't remember, where she makes this joke about Paradise Lost and sexting in the same sentence, I think, and then there's also allusions to medieval lyric poetry, Adam Le Bunden, and then most obviously the epigraph. And so the epigraph is from William Butler Yeats. It's right here on appropriately on the epigraph page, and it's the poem by Yeats, Leda and the Swan, and so that's the first. So Yeats's are the first sentences that we read when we open this book, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that poem and why it, the myth of Leda and the Swan, first of all, and what that tells us about the book, and how you thought about that as a kind of deep background to what you were doing, and then also about the use of poetry in this book.
Yeah, well, the poem traces the classic myth, the Greek myth. Some of you probably know it, but if you don't, in the myth, Zeus swoops down from the heavens in the form of a swan to take his pleasure with immortal Leda. And Zeus is doing this all the time, so it's not an unusual occurrence. But so anyway, there's this encounter, and in a lot of Renaissance art, in, say, Da Vinci's paintings or Michelangelo's, the encounter is depicted as sort of it's pastoral, it's peaceful, everybody's lounging. And actually a lot of modern artists today are still sort of characterizing this myth as a peaceful, seemingly consensual encounter. But to me, the Yeats poem is interesting because it's violent, for one thing, and because it, for a moment, seems to consider Leda's perspective, which I think a lot of that early art really never did. Mm-hmm. It captures this sort of confusion and violence, and then the aftermath of the assault. What happens to history? How does this sort of ripple out into the world and into culture? And so the poem is especially disturbing to me and interesting because it shows a scene that maybe is rape, but that it also might have been something else too. And I was just interested in that ambiguity. And I think that's where the novel meets the poem, is that Leda is sort of grappling herself with that ambiguity, that hazy line between consensual and non-consensual sex. And she has to ask herself difficult questions, and she has to live with the consequences of that encounter. Those consequences will ripple out into her life as the myth sort of affects the world.
Mm-hmm. And were you thinking about, Leda, the other ways that she reads her situation, literally reads it, I think, through poetry or through allusions and so on. So that's one of the things that made it such a compelling campus novel for me, is that kind of learning that she was doing, ways of incorporating this learning into her life, just gradually build her character for us, and are clearly doing that for her as she goes through this year in college.
Yeah, I feel like it's so natural. At least it was for me when I was a college student. You're trying to find some meaning, and you're trying to answer big questions, and you've got these professors in front of you giving you material to think about and knock around in your head. And maybe this is particular to literature courses, but for me, I was using that material to really try to understand where I was in the world. And and so Leda does that too.
Yeah. Now, what about you when you're developing the story? I'd love to hear about, people often will, you'll pick up a novel and you'll read it as if it just sprang right onto the page. But of course, the writing process is very long. The revision process can often be longer. I'd love to hear about your, where this novel, how it developed as you went through writing and rewriting and revision. What are some of the things some of the choices that you made that kind of behind the scenes? Is there anything that sticks out to you about the writing and revision process?
Yeah, it's all a blur.
Yeah. I think we experience that too. It's like, yes, it's a book. Of course it came out just like that. That's
yeah. I just sat down and wrote it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it took years for sure, and years of revisions, and but there were a couple of things that I felt sure about going into the writing. I was sure that I didn't want the book to be the kind of thriller that sort of culminates in the unveiling of a murderer. I wanted there to be more happening. I don't think I'm giving anything away.
Yeah, I was about to warn you off, but I think you're on good ground here.
But I didn't want that to be the only thing.
Right.
I wanted, I wanted to follow a character, and I wanted to sort of experience her emotional development alongside these sort of developments in her world and her community and her university. So I was sure about that, but there were definitely scenes where, I had to write them many times, and I just wasn't getting right. And, I often think there's this sort of weird metaphor that I use in my own brain that's, when I'm thinking about plot, and it is, it's a river, a big river. If anyone's ever been on a really large river like the Amazon, they know that there's sort of a current moving through this sort of massive body of water. And it's really difficult to find that sort of that current, but that's where the energy is, that's where the motion is.
Right.
But when you're writing, you're in the process of writing, it's so easy to find yourself sort of paddling around in this stagnant water, and you realize like the current is way over there. And, I've been stuck here for, maybe days, maybe months. And so for me, I think George Saunders says this too, for me, the act of writing is a lot about finding the energy and finding the movement. And it can be a very mysterious process, but.
Yeah, and a rivers are really, full of analogies. You have concurrent, streams running by each other. You have tributaries. You have a dam that stops everything for a while.
Oh no!
A nice way of thinking about it. Yeah. Yeah, well, this is one of the uh, last things I'll ask you before asking you to read a little bit for us is about suspense, because you said you didn't want it to be a thriller, where everything is divulged at the end. It's like a whodunit or something, and yet the novel is incredibly suspenseful. I mean, I couldn't stop turning the pages, and so it to me it comes across as a suspense. I don't know if you intend it as a kind of literary suspense or if those genre distinctions are kind of silly in the end. But are you conscious of building suspense? Like when you end a chapter, do you think about how can I get the reader to turn the page, or does it just happen naturally for you? Because for me, it's so much of it is artifice. Like I have to end in just the right place to maintain my own curiosity, let alone the readers. And I wonder if you think about that as part of what you're doing when you're creating this art is the art of suspense.
Yeah. Well, it's partially to keep myself entertained. I like to keep myself guessing too.
Yeah.
But Flannery O'Connor said this great thing about, I don't know what the actual quote is, but it's about how mystery grows with knowledge. And I think that's sort of a craft thing, right? That in a good thriller, as we learn more and more about the circumstances of the mystery, ideally we grow more and more curious. We don't grow less curious the more we learn.
Yeah.
So I suppose I tried to make it so that with every piece of information we learn about Charlotte's disappearance, for example, then that opens up another question, or maybe a whole set of questions to sort of keep the readers going. So with everything we discover, we also have something new to wonder about.
No, that's a really great way of thinking about it, because so often we think, the cheap suspense tricks are, and suddenly the doorbell rang.
Yeah.
Right. So it's our ignorance, and we're ignorant, so we need to know. Whereas the knowledge, the more we know, that can be another nice way of thinking about that. No, that's great. Well, how about why don't you read it a little bit and set it up, and then we'll open things up for comments and questions.
Sure. Yeah. Get my book here.
Yeah. I love the cover too. Yeah.
I know. I don't have my nails painted. Sorry. Bruce? Okay, so this is pretty early on in the novel, so I don't think I should have to set too much up. But what's happening here is that Leda is, maybe some of you will know this term, she's tabling on the lawn, which is basically, if you're a part of an organization, it's when you set up a table and you maybe hand out flyers, or you're asking for money, or if you've been to UVA, then you've probably seen these people. There's a bake sale, or so she's tabling with her sorority. And I'll start there.
Great.
The sidewalks surrounding the lawn pumped like arteries early Wednesday morning. The long quad of grass stayed wet with dew, even after the sun clipped pavilion roofs, so students flowed up and down the brick perimeters, colorful jackets blinking behind the white colonnade, footsteps trickling until they dispersed at either end of the walkways, forking out into the limbs of the university. It was the perfect time to ask people for money. Students flowed toward quizzes, presentations, and meetings, remembering that they hadn't eaten, just as they passed the bake sale tables. It had been Carly's idea, a joint fundraiser between all the sororities to bring home Charlotte. Leda wasn't sure where the funds would go exactly, but all the same, she and her fellow Psi-Delts made cupcakes, muffins, and brownies. Today, Leda arranged the baked goods on trays and shook an old cheese puff jar, rattling the quarters. "Bring home Charlotte Mask," she said over and over. "Bring home Charlotte." The sky was tense and cloudless. Hundreds of boys passed, and every one of them was not Ian. Ian's the crush. He's the love interest. She wanted to see him. She thought that seeing him might help her remember. Not to mention that she liked him, and wanted to know what they were. Boyfriend, girlfriend, friends, strangers. She wasn't naive. She knew that just because they'd had sex, she thought they had, at least, didn't mean they'd get married. Like a lot of college girls, she'd slept with boys whose names she no longer remembered. It was all part of playing pretend adulthood. You had to figure out who you were and what you wanted, and then what you would do. It wasn't as simple as everyone made it out in childhood. How they asked you what you wanted to be, as if that were the only decision you'd be making. They never told you about the in-between choices. Never said you'd be deciding if and how much to drink, deciding where to draw the line between flirtation and harassment, between fun and scary, deciding whether or not to trust somebody. It was all remarkably tricky. And for Leda, what made it worse was that she had no one to ask, is this okay? Am I on the right track? Without her mom, she had to figure it out through trial and error. On the subject of Ian, a few moments were beginning to stand out to her. Their interlaced fingers, his eyes meeting hers, the way he'd touched her hair as if it were precious, as if she were precious. No one had looked at her like that. No one since her mother. Outside these brief moments, she had nothing else to go on. So here was another one of these adult situations for which no one had prepared her. If you think you had sex, how do you make sure? Or put another way, if you black out, is it worth looking back? And if you look back, what if something awful happened? Mary stopped by on the way to Shakespeare 2 as the Christians dispersed. She had made Leda take Shakespeare 1 with her last year, still trying to convince Leda to study English with her. And though Leda had liked it, it had been demanding emotionally. It had made her consider things, Yorick's skull, the living statue of Hermione, that she'd rather not dwell on, really. Now, Mary took hold of Leda's own skull, pushing Leda's hair back, examining something. Leda managed. Excuse me? What happened to your lip? Mary said. I don't know. Leda pulled out of Mary's hands. Dry skin. That is not dry skin. It's not like I'm bleeding. You are bleeding. Oh shit. Leda touched it. Her finger came away red.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. That one of the reasons I love that passage is that I remember shivering when I read that in the novel, just because you had this allusion to Yorick's skull. One of the great moments in literary history. Hamlet at the grave, alas, poor Yorick, and then you have someone touching Leda's skull. So that gets at so many of those issues of identity and so on. But it's also just a great scene in the middle of the lawn, and there's kind of posturing about finding the missing girl, and but there's sincerity there too. But it's also a fundraiser, right? So, yeah, well, good. Well, I think
I saw some. Oh, I see.
Oh yeah, so people should feel free to post questions, anything they want that Anna can talk about. And while we're waiting, I wonder, are there other moments in the novel that lent themselves to those kinds of broad questions about about identity? And I'm thinking especially of that amazing moment when she's running at first through the lawn, and what is one of the things I was thinking is, what is she running from? Where is she going, and is she aware of of the place that she's leaving from, and what it means to run, not walk, through this milieu?
Yeah, I think she is conscious of that. In a way, or maybe she's not conscious of it, but she is conscious of the fact that she doesn't like exercising indoors. She says at one point that she doesn't like running on treadmills and like people being chased in a dream. She feels like she needs some sort of movement, and she in a way likes feeling chased. She has this memory of being chased by her mom, and what makes it fun is that it's sort of, it's both fun and scary. You're sort of on the line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that resonates throughout the novel too, or I hope it does. Just that sort of, again, the gray area, finding yourself sort of walking these lines and realizing that, the risk is a little bit of what makes this all fun. How do I walk this line and still stay safe?
Right. Yes. We have a question from someone in the audience. What was the hardest scene in the novel to write? Maybe that's a hard question. But
yeah, it is a hard question. Well, maybe, I guess the ending was pretty hard. I find endings hard in general. But some of the hardest scenes to write actually were the scenes involving Leda's mom. So mostly just because because they were emotional, and I felt I did my best to sort of separate myself from the content and be in Leda's head and not in my head. But there were some moments where where it was hard not to drift into my own self, my own emotions and my own memories.
So the hard emotionally. What about hard just mechanically on the level of getting the sentences down? Were there any kind of plot difficulties where you're like, God, I just can't figure out that one little, I can't crack that nut,
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there were. I don't know. I think it was just the ending, really. I went back and forth with a lot of different endings, and I don't want to give too many details.
Yeah.
It's the ending, it's I hate spoilers. But that was really the toughest for me, I think, because there's a lot riding on it.
Yeah. Another question, what role did research play in your writing process? I already asked you about about Greek life, but other aspects of research, I was thinking one like police procedure, things like that. So tell us a little bit about your research.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, Leda's sort of, she's sort of an amateur. She's not a detective. She doesn't really, she doesn't know too much about how these procedures work. She's sort of she's a bystander. She's like any of us. And I wanted to take that perspective because that's not only is it my perspective, but I think that's how a lot of us experience these horrible tragedies that occur in our communities, where we're standing by and we don't really know what to do. We don't know what to make of it, and how to respond. So really, Leda doesn't have a lot of expertise. A lot of the work was sort of me digging through her emotional development and really just trying to be tuned in to Leda as a character. And so to be honest, there wasn't a lot of outside research. It was just a lot of sort of development work, working with the character and trying to get to know her.
Another question, what do you what would be your advice to aspiring writers, people who are out of college and want to write a debut novel and have it come out from a big publisher like LEDA and the Swan? What's your main point of advice?
Yeah. I think my main point of advice is people aren't going to like this because people don't like revising.
Yeah.
But to me, being willing to revise my own work has been so important. And I feel like when I've worked with young writers or writers who are younger than me, the ones who make the most progress are the ones that are really willing to get in there and sort of demolish their own work. And it sounds horrible and it's hard, but it's important to be able to, I don't know. Sometimes I call it not take yourself so seriously. Because for me, I am sort of, I can err toward the sides of seriousness, and it's helpful for me to sort of break into that and encourage myself to be a little more playful, a little more daring, and more willing to admit that, I'm not perfect, and the first draft is not the last draft for sure.
Yeah. I heard a writer I really admire, Lauren Groff, say one time, don't take your work very seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. And I think that can be really helpful for a writer. A question, were there any authors who, besides Yeats, that you read while writing, any books that particularly influenced you?
Good question.
I guess models, the writers that you most admire. And
yeah. I know I've got some. I mean, I suppose I do admire, I've always admired Virginia Woolf, in just her attention to scene and the way she can sort of sink into a character. And I don't know. So, I mean, in a way, I can't say it's inspiration necessarily, because she's just in a league of her own. But I do love her, her attention to character and just how deep she sinks you into moments, and how she can just draw out a day, and turn that into an entire novel.
Well, I can really feel that in Leda and the Swan. I mean, it's not just one day, but it does have that feeling of prolongation of, taking a day and turning it into a long series of steps. Yeah. One more question. So what was the most surprising thing about writing your first book?
Oh. I don't know. I guess I was surprised at how long it took. It's really a lot of work.
Yeah.
I think it was not the first novel I had ever attempted, but it was the first one that I wrote multiple drafts of, and really stuck with for years. And I think that maybe it surprised me at how diligent I had to be, and really waking up every morning and doing the work, not taking a day off. And luckily, I sort of work that way already, and so it comes relatively naturally. But it's a lot of work, and that was a little surprising to young, just out of college me. Like, life is work.
And I'm, of course, curious about the failed novel, right? It'd be fun to just have something where we all get together and read from the novels that didn't get finished, failed, and talk about why. That's what we should really be doing. We might have time for one or two more questions. Okay. In fact, right on that subject, how many novels did you write before Leda? Was this the novel that landed you your agent? What did you learn writing those others? You talked about that a little bit, but that process of finding an agent, did you send something that got you an agent and then you worked on Leda, or was Leda the one that got you an agent?
Yeah.
We had a little flip there.
I'll briefly say that I did write my first novel I wrote after graduating from UVA. I moved to Austin, Texas with my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband. And it was set in West Virginia, and it was sort of like a cult book. And it was great practice. I mean, it just got me into, I learned what my schedule was, and it just taught me how to sort of put in the hours. But yeah, Leda was the book that connected me with my agent. And I met him through a professor of mine at Hollins, Richard Dillard. He was my tutorial leader and was a great, just an inspirational figure in my time at Hollins. And he helped me a lot. And he introduced me to Madison, my agent, and I sent him the manuscript when he had time to read it, and he liked it. So it all worked out.
That's a huge thing. Yeah. Well, congratulations again. Yeah. Anna, you're back on.
Yes, I am. I sorry there. I know there are possibly more audience questions. Feel a little selfish taking the last one for myself, but I was really curious. I guess it's 7:55. So, I mean, I think we should probably wrap, or we could maybe take one more question, Anna, if you would like. So if anybody has anything that they've been sitting on, you know, otherwise I am always bursting with questions. And what you read was just so beautiful. And it was just the way you talk about this work is just absolutely fascinating. So it's been so good to sit and listen to you talk tonight. I'm going to hide my question here since I got it answered. I guess we can wrap then if you'd like to.
Yeah, maybe Anna, could you tell us, are you superstitious? Can you tell us what you're working on now?
Ooh.
If you don't want to, that's totally fine. We'll just leave it a mystery.
Yeah, I'm a little superstitious, but I will say it's in a similar setting to LEDA. You know, I'm really drawn to, I grew up here. I grew up in Charlottesville, and I just feel like it might be, it's my place. You know, I'm trying to figure it out as best I can.
Good.
It's another novel about female friendship and sort of, digging into history.
Good.
Yeah. That sounds really cool.
Absolutely.
That sounds really cool.
It's pretty rough at this point, so.
They always are. First draft is not the last draft.
It will change.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We've had a great crowd here tonight. Anna and Bruce, you can't see, but I can. LEDA and the Swan is available wherever fine books are sold, but especially at One More Page Books.
Yes.
So go ahead and pick up your own copy. And again, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Bruce. And just a little round of applause. Hopefully you're doing the same in your own homes. And everybody have a good night. So
thank you. Thanks to everybody who tuned in, and thank you, Bruce, for your thoughtful questions.
You bet.
Thank you, Anna, and One Page Books.
Yep.
Absolutely. All right.